So I would now like to invite Wendy Newman, and we've heard a bit about Wendy's work today. Wendy is the CEO of the Wheatbelt Development Commission, and she has been leading a really important initiative called Ageing in the Bush, which really does have potential, which I'm sure we'll hear about, potential to be scaled up and rolled out in other parts of the state. So welcome to you, Wendy.
Thanks everyone. It really is a privilege to be here today because I know each and every one of you is actively involved in doing real work on the ground to make a fundamental difference. I'm just going to quickly give you a bit of a case study that talks about collective impact, if you like, and how collaboration can really deliver an integrated approach to aged care in regional WA. And I guess if I could do the analogy, this is very much like eating an elephant. It's big. You don't know where to start, you don't know what the reaction will be, and it just seems an enormous task when you have 9 very vast and diverse regions, over 100 local governments, and in the Wheatbelt alone we have 43. And I'd love to acknowledge my Wheatbelt local government colleagues here today from York, Pingelly, Walcatcham and elsewhere. The Wheatbelt is really leading the way in working together in groups. It was the Wheatbelt local governments that started this work by all 43 agreeing that identifying this issue of ageing and ensuring that their community members could age well in their communities was a priority effort for that. And out of that work, we have now worked across the state to come up with a new model that we hope delivers a much better outcome and enables people to remain in their communities. This work was being done because at a federal and state level, there was huge reform at a funding and policy level, and we were wanting to be well placed to be able to contribute to that debate and to be actually come to the table with some solutions about what a well-aged model looked like and that would actually work in a regional context. There was also a situation where we had many providers at a state, local, private and not-for-profit delivery level. Perhaps our WA Country Health Service is what we would call a provider of last resort of aged care and other residential care and other care services. And as Scott pointed out, those population figures are somewhat alarming and the growth rates are higher in regional WA than they are in metropolitan Perth. So this tsunami of need was coming towards us, and local governments felt very strongly in the Wheatbelt that they needed to be well placed to make sure this wasn't yet another burden on them and a responsibility for them in a time of fiscal constraint. They were well placed to again come up with proactive solutions that didn't mean they became the provider of last resort. So all of this work was very much aligned to the reform process. So aged care in a regional context, as I said, the ageing population is increasing larger than the metropolitan area. There's significant state investment at the moment through royalties for regions, particularly through the Southern Inland Health Initiative and through the Northern Inland Health Initiative, looking at very much fostering new models, different ways of doing things. How can we actually fundamentally transform what we are doing to get a better outcome for regional residents? And so it was on the back of that that we've been able to influence some solutions. So I hope what you've come to at the end of my presentation this morning is researched, evidence-based approach that is well connected to community need and actually being able to implement real solutions quickly on the ground to make a difference. And we believe that this is a timely topic for the state. It was just wonderful to hear Judy this morning because I'm just such a firm believer in an asset-based approach, and we actually believe that this isn't a burden on our communities. Our mature residents are very much the gold in our community. Their wisdom, their experience, their commitment to community is something that we want to hold to continue to add value to our communities. So, and in terms of the industry development opportunities that this industry offers for regional WA, it is immense and we need to seize those opportunities. So what we wanted to do was to arrive at a model that brought all of this stuff together. It actually had to work at a community level. It needed to align to those policy and funding parameters, so we weren't in a place of suggesting something different that wouldn't work. And it needed to minimise that financial burden dialogue. We needed to move away from that and make sure that we're in fact talking better and different, not more costly. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the evidence base behind this work and the relevance to community was absolutely critical. So we started this collective approach by getting the scope right, and it was about identifying those aged care models for regional WA that enabled our residents to age in their community for as long as possible. We had too many residents having to leave our communities because of the lack of service and the lack of community support. So the whole process was very much designed to ensure we maximised that engagement. We weren't going to be talking to them, it was very much a process of talking with them, arriving at an agreed vision and scope, making sure that those partners in the process invested in the process so that they were wanting to be part of the outcome, and identifying and linking regional leaders and influencers to make sure that we could get maximum broad impact. You know, the ripple in the pond, you put one bit in and you get the right people involved so that you can get maximum impact. It was also really important that in terms of this evidence-based approach and coming up with new models, we had to choose the expert that was held in very high regard. So choosing the consultancy that we did, we're very pleased to be able to have someone that was really great at community engagement, but really understood federal funding parameters and could argue that point very, very well. Also critical to the engagement was the regional visits, and I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Lauren Clark. Like me, Lauren's come to the Wheatbelt because of love. She has reinvented herself fabulously as a self-confessed aged care junkie, and her positivity in all of this has been fundamental in thinking outside the back box, connecting people and making sure we're at the right place with the right people at the right time, presenting information to them and having those possible models validated. It was no good us sitting in a room and coming up with wild ideas if the community couldn't touch it, feel it, agree to it and be committed to it. So that validation of that work was a really important part of the process. And then after that engagement, after getting commitment to possible models, it's making sure that this work sticks, that it is enduring and lives well beyond the life of you and I being here in this room today. So from a community perspective, it had to be a sum of the whole. So we heard this morning about that, that continuum of capability. This model had to address that continuum of capability from highly capable to less capable, and the capacity to continue to stay in community, and we're pretty confident that that model does that. We had to have the right people at the table agreeing and committing to solutions, and I'm really proud of our 43 local governments, Wheatbelt local governments. They're all at the table, they're all committed to the solutions, and can I tell you, they hound me on a regular basis to make sure they're getting their bit of the very important investment we're putting into the solutions. And then we had to work within these budgetary and policy scopes, but can I say in terms of the budget, I have to acknowledge the Royalties for Regions program because it is providing key investment in enabling us to invest in these new solutions. So in essence, the solution we came to was what we call an integrated four-plank model. It says that, yes, the foundation for this work and what we're talking about today is age-friendly communities. It is a low-cost, high-impact solution when we work to deliver in age-friendly communities. The second critical plank, and critically important in regional WA because of the lack of diversity of housing, is the age-friendly housing. That is the fundamental enabler for people to remain at home as long as possible and in community as long as possible. And then as capacity is impacted, that ability to deliver home care and support, critically important. And then, and finally, that residential aged care, and as we heard this morning, 1 in 7, it's currently 1 in 9 Australia-wide. We think it's higher in regional WA because we don't have those underpinning 3 planks. We are finding people, our elderly residents, going into a hospital care setting for the most part for months and years rather than end-of-life care for weeks and at the worst outcome months. So our model is aiming to focus where we can have best impact for lowest cost and acknowledging that residential care will not exist in all of our communities, but across our communities we will have access to those services and we will choose to support those services which are going to be the most sustainable and relevant to our community into the future. So I'm pleased to say, out of that model, we're already delivering some pretty fantastic solutions, we think. Working with the department's age-friendly planning and infrastructure, we came up with a great little online toolkit that enabled communities, and it was just joyous to see groups of seniors walking around town with iPads, doing a bit of audit of their community facilities and the services to contribute to that important age planning work. We are trialling in the Wheat Belt what we're calling the cluster model of housing, a supported accommodation model that if we get this right with platinum level design of dementia housing in a cluster that accesses and enables effective and viable delivery of care, we're pretty confident that we're going to come up with a really great alternative to costly residential care. So they're being trialled in a couple of communities in Pingelly and Cunderdin off the back of unpacking an MPS hospital and looking at what primary care looks like in an aged care environment. So we're really excited about that work that's happening. 7 groups of local governments in the Wheat Belt now have developed, and we are starting to invest in business cases through the Royalties for Regions programs for this contemporary well-aged housing clusters that can exist as independent living units, but if we get it right, will really facilitate the delivery of care. Home and community care, lots of reform going on in this space. We're watching with keen interest consumer-directed care. It could be fantastic. It could be really interesting where you have thin markets and where choice is perhaps no choice. So making sure that that choice is available and looking at some innovative workforce solutions through the TAFE sector, making sure we've got good pathways of employment for the aged care workforce. And then in terms of residential care, including dementia and respite, really looking at, as I said earlier, that industry development focus, jobs and growth, dare I say, oh no. But really looking at what those real possibilities are there. In regional WA, we have a real under-participation of women in the workforce. We see a real match here about how we increase that participation in industries that match their skill set. And then I think my final slide is particularly focusing in on Aboriginal care. As we were doing this work in the Wheat Belt and across regional WA, we were a bit struck about the lack of visibility for Aboriginal people in this space. And so there were some key principles that we think are really important as we move forward to work in a case-by-case basis to design the right solution. And they are about enhancing family capacity in participation to care. And I saw a fantastic example up in Columbaroo just last Friday. A young girl from community trained in dialysis care and caring for 2 people in her community, a home dialysis program. It was just awesome. So that sort of stuff is the future. The notion of site-managed Aboriginal older housing model, which we are keen to trial in regional WA. The importance of package flexibility, which is a federal policy issue that we are keen to pursue. And moving beyond fixed-term program funding, we all know and we have seen short programs, short life, minimum impact. So those sorts of programs that we can ensure we build the capacity and capability on the ground and we build the sustainable, viable model on the ground so that as those programs come and go, the impact on the ground is less. And then there's some great models about brokering care in the home that we're looking at. So already this work is sort of reasonably fresh off the press as of late last year. We are already seeing significant investment. We are seeing communities collaborate, engage and make a fundamental difference. We're really excited about the outcomes. I think regional communities are not prepared to accept the status quo. So we're quite confident that a new approach is going to achieve a much better outcome, and particularly if we're looking at it from a community perspective and what does this continuum of care look like for me in my community. I think historically we've been great at looking at a program approach or a funding approach, and from a community perspective you can have up to a dozen providers doing very little across a thin spectrum. We need to get less doing greater depth. So thanks for listening this morning. Happy to catch up with you over the lunch break and afterwards to share more of our fabulous story.
Thanks very much, Wendy, and we'll certainly be watching this space in terms of how it's rolled out elsewhere in the regions. It's now my pleasure to invite Ian Carter, who is the CEO of Anglicare, to come and talk to us about a very innovative project, Foyer Oxford, to addressing issues of youth homelessness. So thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. As well as trying to start a revolution many years ago about not wearing a tie, I'm also regularly trying to avoid using a PowerPoint. So I'm just going to have a yarn with you about some things that are on the go. I don't know whether you'd be pleased about that or displeased. Anyway, that's what I'm doing. Can I begin by saying Nala Kardich Noongar Mort Kane Kardak Nijabudja. I acknowledge the Noongar people as the original custodians of this land, and I honour their elders past and present. It was great for me to be here, and I felt like the wild card being invited here to talk. I'm not involved in aged services, even though from our market research everyone thinks we're an aged care provider, but we're not. But Anglicare provides a wide range of services, and to read and hear the stuff around the age-friendly stuff was really interesting, and certainly the whole approach, the collaborative, the co-design, the thinking, the reflection, the innovation is very exciting. At the moment, I'm trying to think about a homeless-friendly community or a family and domestic violence-friendly community. And I think there are some key lessons from the approach in this area that can apply to where we go with that. Leave you with a thought on homeless-friendly. In the end of April, in Western Australia, there were 13,154 properties on the rental vacancy thing. At any one time in Western Australia, there are 8,500 homeless people. Go figure. There's a challenge for all of us. Foyer Oxford was one of those responses that we put in place. If you drive along Oxford Street in Leederville and you ever knew the old Leederville TAFE, and the wonderful big gum, which is actually heritage listed, right there you'll see this amazing facility, which is Australia's largest by far youth transition, youth homelessness facility. It is a home to 98 young people, right in the middle of Oxford Street in Leederville. It was started by a consortium. It wasn't started by a government program being announced. We then had to make our way through the government programs to try and find the money for it. And we were really lucky. When we started this, which was about 8 years ago, tight funding, nowhere near as tight as it is now. Then the global financial crisis hit. And I'd created a consortium with Foundation Housing and the Central Institute of Technology to try and deliver this concept of a foyer, a key transition point for homeless people, young people, 17 to 23, into independent living. We were fast following an idea from the UK. We thought it was a brilliant concept. We stuck very closely to the foyer concept from the UK. We headed off on this journey as a collaborative partnership. We co-designed it together. We worked our roles out. We wrote up a 5-page memorandum of understanding with the assistance of a legal firm on a pro bono basis, and that MOU has underpinned us for 8 years. It hasn't changed in the 8 years, and it's underpinned the way we operate. It is built on a sense of respect and obligation and trust between the 3 CEOs, which has permeated right across the agencies. And for me, that is the real critical stuff about trying to... It's the good old asset-based community development stuff. It's the good old trust building and relationship building. I'm sure Karen's going to talk about it in the work that she's doing down in the Southwest metropolitan area. It is that trust building, hope building, relationship building which underpin this. The global financial crisis hit, and you remember Rudd and Swan came out, and some of us managed to convince in some meetings in Canberra that a social housing package needed to be part of the response as well as the other things that were coming out. When it was announced in Western Australia, the Department of Housing put out an expression of interest. We were sitting there with this concept and we put an expression of interest in. And we said we want to build a 98-unit thing. And I got a phone call one day from the Department of Housing saying, Ian, letters will be following, but you're going to get $23 million to build this centre. So after picking myself up off the floor, I then spent the next couple of weeks convinced the boards of Foundation Housing, CIT and Anglicare, and we then started the journey of building without any recurrent funding to run the operations with 98 people. We just headed off on a journey. But we just believed in ourselves. We believed in the concept, and away we went. So off we went. The journey was about measuring progress, and we were piloting a foyer project in Mount Lawley. We use a framework called results-based accountability, and we were generating serious and clear data about the change we were making with young people. So when we went to the Department of Child Protection and Family Support for homelessness money, we picked up a proportion of the funding we needed. We still needed money. And again, this is a journey of serendipity. Serendipitously, the BHP Billiton had looked at their own operations and where they were going, and had got feedback from staff that they were spending a lot of money in the regions and none in Perth. And which I know Wendy'd be really happy with, but in terms of there was a real perception that, well, Perth is missing out, we're not doing stuff. So out they went. We put our hand up to fund 50% of the recurrent funding for Oxford for 5 years, which is $1 million a year for 5 years, which we won. And we won it off the basis of a brilliant concept, but we had the results-based accountability evidence that was all accrued there. We had wonderful graphs and pie charts and bar charts and all those wonderfully exciting things, and they looked at it and said, it's compelling and we'll fund it. And they're still with us on a really exciting journey. So for me, there is all those evidence, things that people have talked about. It was about collaboration and trust and holding us together as a group. Neil Fernandez has left CIT now, but we have a new CEO there, Michelle Hode, so we inducted her in through some critical issues like lots of coffee and carrot cake at a thing, and she's now part of the family and feels very strongly the same sense of connection to the journey. If you drive past Oxford Street in Leederville and see that really bright building, it is a huge building and it is the home for 98 young people, but it also includes underneath the Oxford Yard Coffee Shop and a Pilates studio and the Youth Affairs Council, who are all commercial tenants in that building to help make it more viable. And it's created a sense of community. Right from the start, even before the first sod was turned, we were working in the community for people to understand it. Most people, when they heard about Foyer Oxford, who lived in the immediate community, thought about rape, murder, pillaging and all kinds of things. And we ran some meetings. Some of them went well, some not so well. We then got the police along to another meeting, had a sit-down discussion with a whole range of people. We brought people on a journey. We actually, again, have tracked that data. So we've done community perception, community feedback every quarter for the last X number of years. And on the last one, 98% of people living within X metres of Foyer Oxford are strongly supportive of the Foyer Oxford. It's been a really important journey of building that relationship. So I've probably got virtually no time. As well as that, I also want to take up a couple of quick ones I want to throw at you. I was also involved some years ago. It was sort of personal in some senses because I knew some of the people involved and I'd spent different times in Bailing Up. But Bailing Up has been on a journey of creating this thing called Bailing Up Vintage Care. So if you want to Google it, Bailing Up Vintage Care, I got dragged in for the cost of a couple of jam jars and various other bits and pieces from people who are involved in it, and I spent some time helping them do strategy thinking and strategy planning as they thought about what they were going to do. For them, it's, you know, we talk about ageing in place. If you know Bailing Up, Malali Up, Nannup, Donnybrook, Bridgetown, Greenbushes, that little area through there, of course the Bailing Up people didn't want to go to bloody Donnybrook, which is just down the road. But for them, that was an absolute, oh shit, I'm not going there. But their real option was probably Bunbury. The best option was going to be Donnybrook. So they went through a whole range of processes, went through some things, and the Donnybrook Bailing Up Shire in the end, and a range of other players, and they've got, I think it's 4 little units in the middle of Balingham, where 4 people are now living, and they rang me the other day, and I'm doing some QA with them on governance and other stuff because they're now looking at expanding it a little bit. But that's really exciting. What a brilliant little journey in their own way. That was their sense of ageing in place. 2 minutes. On a lot larger scale, when the job network changed some years ago, remember the CES and then job network, largest non-defence force, I was involved with 5 mates in creating a national thing called Job Futures. Job Futures was 50-odd community agencies from around the country who decided we weren't going to be able to compete with the big private sector organisations or Mission Australia and the Salvation Army as big national bodies. We were independent community agencies. So we created a company limited by guarantee, who got a formal exemption under the Trade Practices Act to collude on price and territory, and we put in a tender and ended up with a $150 million contract. Job Futures, interesting story, happy to talk about it, you can get it on there. We've just won a contract, Anglicare and Uniting Care, to run Metropolitan Financial Counselling Services. Another model of collaborating and coming together. There used to be a whole range of stuff. I was in the media saying all kinds of things when they cut the Metropolitan Financial Counselling. In the end, the whole thing eventually happened. They reinstated some of the money, went out to tender. We put in a tender, Anglicare and Uniting Care. I've got to say, and I've said this to Jennifer, we put in the tender and we weren't quite sure whether the department was going to have the guts to go with our tender because it was broken into 5 sub-metropolitan regions. Our tender bid said, with 8 community sector partners, the 2 agencies wanted to only run the entire Metropolitan Financial Counselling Service. We didn't want to break it up, and we weren't going to accept 1 sub-region or 2. It was either the whole lot or none. And we got the whole lot. We're now running a seamless metropolitan-wide financial counselling service. If you move from Rockingham to Joondalup, you'll be on exactly the same system. You'll be locked in terms of the way you operate, same database, same professional development, same system. It's another way of things. And the last thing I'll leave you with is measuring outcomes. It's not age-friendly, but I'm really taken by a project in Leeds in the UK, and Google Leeds Obsessions. And in the UK, they've come up with indicators about progress around the health and well-being of young children in the Leeds area. They identified 5 outcome areas, 17 indicators, and they're focusing on 3 key ones which evidence shows will make a significant difference to the long-term aspirations and capabilities of young people. And those 3 indicators are what everyone focuses on in the community: government, non-government, charitable, community, education, child protection, the whole lot, and they're called the Leeds Obsessions. Talk about focusing on achieving something in a collaborative way. I'll leave it there, thanks.
Thanks very much to you, Ian, and another really great example of innovation and collaboration, which I've got to say that's a project that's having really great outcomes for young people in WA, so congratulations on that.